Have you ever wondered why we have so many different breeds of chickens? Barred Rocks, Rhode Island Reds, Orpingtons, Jersey Giants, we have so many. The list goes on and on. These breeds didn't just appear out of nowhere. They're the result of one of the most bizarre economic bubbles in history. Between 1845 and 1855, people went absolutely mad for chickens, and I mean that literally. They paid what would be tens of thousands of dollars in today's money for a single chicken. Just one chicken. They hired armed guards to protect their coops. They gathered in crowds of 10,000 just to look at these fancy chickens. It was called hen fever. And today we're going to explore how a young queen's obsession sparked a financial bubble, changed agriculture forever, and gave us the heritage breeds that many of us keep in our backyards today. To understand just how wild hen fever was, we need to understand what chickens were like before the craze hit. In the early 1800s, if you were living in Britain or America, chickens were, well, they were nothing special. They were just small, scrappy birds, mostly game fowl or bantams, that ran around farmyards eating scraps. People didn't even bother to record them in farm inventories because they just weren't considered valuable enough to write down. If you saw the chickens that most people kept back then, you'd barely recognize them. They were closer in size to the bantams we keep now, but even scrappier. They weren't bred for anything in particular. They just sort of existed. They laid some eggs when they felt like it. Maybe you'd eat one occasionally, but they were basically self-sufficient scavengers that you tolerated in your farmyard. There were no breed standards, no chicken shows, no poultry associations. The idea of paying serious money for a chicken would have seemed completely absurd. People didn't really care about what they looked like or what traits they had, but that was all about to change, because across the ocean in China, there were chickens that looked very, very different. In 1842, Queen Victoria received a gift. Yep, you guessed it, chickens. After the first Opium War with China, she was presented with 7 exotic chickens from the Far East. They were called Cochin China fowl, or Cochins, as we know them today. Now, you have to imagine what this must have been like if all you've ever seen is a small, skinny leghorn or a scrappy game bird, and then suddenly someone shows you a cochin. These birds were massive. Roosters could weigh up to 11 pounds. They were covered head to toe in soft, fluffy feathers that even covered their legs and feet, like they were wearing feathered pants. And they were supposedly excellent layers. To Victorian eyes, they looked absolutely majestic. Queen Victoria was smitten. She had a special aviary built at Windsor Home Park, and this was not just a simple coop. According to the Illustrated London News, her collection occupied half a dozen very extensive yards, several small fields, and numerous feeding houses, laying sheds, and hospitals. Hospitals, yup, for chickens. She spent her leisure time there breeding and showing her birds. And because she was Queen Victoria, one of the most powerful and influential women in the world at this time, whatever she did, everyone wanted to copy. She was the absolute trendsetter. You have to understand, this was the height of the Victorian era. Status was everything. You wanted to impress everybody. The wealthy competed with elaborate dinner parties where they'd serve pineapples that cost the equivalent of £3,000 today to grow, just to show they could afford it. Like, That's kind of nuts. Breeding and showing exotic animals was part of that status game, and now the Queen herself was doing it with her new chickens. It started in Britain around 1845 and spread to America by 1849. And when I say people went crazy for these chickens, I'm not exaggerating. The prices were astronomical. In 1850, a single egg could cost $1, which is about $30 in today's money. A pair of fancy chickens could sell for $120. That's $3,600 today. But those weren't even the peak prices. The historical records show 40 guineas, about $4,800 today, for a single Shanghai rooster. 100 pounds, that's $11,400 today for 20 Spanish chickens. And some chickens at the height of the bubble sold for what would be the equivalent of $10,000 per bird. People who made good investments early became very wealthy. George P. Burnham, a Massachusetts newspaperman who got into chicken breeding in 1849, was soon selling his birds for the equivalent of hundreds of dollars per breeding pair. Within 2 years, he bought an estate and was raising over 1,000 birds. That's going to add up to a lot of money. In September 1849, the first exhibition of fancy poultry was held in Boston's Public Garden. 10,000 people showed up. 10,000 to look at chickens. The newspapers described it as a magnificent exhibition. It sparked more shows, a second in Boston the next year, then a national show in New York. The whole country was swept up in it. And this is where it gets really interesting from a social perspective. Hen fever spread across all classes. It wasn't just the wealthy trying to impress each other anymore. Doctors, lawyers, farmers, merchants, tradesmen, everyone wanted in on this chicken boom because it looked like easy money. Buy some fancy birds, breed them, sell the offspring for enormous prices. It was speculation, pure and simple. People were treating chickens like we might treat cryptocurrency today, buying them not because they really wanted to have chickens, but because they thought the price would keep going up. Some people hired armed guards to protect their valuable chicken coops. Yeah, can you imagine that? Guards to protect chicken coops. It's just a little bit crazy from us sitting here in this modern day where chickens are really not quite that valuable anymore. Here's the thing about hen fever that makes it different from a lot of financial bubbles that we've had. It actually left something quite valuable behind. At least I think it's valuable. Before this craze, there were no breed standards, no organized breeding programs. Chickens were just chickens. But the hen fever created something called the fancy, the community of breeders and show enthusiasts. They established associations. They created standards of perfection for different breeds. They began keeping careful records of breeding lines. The Victorians were all about this stuff. In 1873, the American Poultry Association was founded, and they published the Standard of Perfection, the very first official documentation of chicken breeds. This is where most of our heritage breeds were developed. Plymouth Rocks, Rhode Island Reds, Sussex, Brahmas, these weren't ancient breeds. They were created during or immediately after the hen fever era by breeders who were crossing those imported Asian birds with European and American stock, trying to create the perfect bird. So when I'm out here with my heritage breed flock, I'm looking at the direct descendants of that crazy period in history. These breeds that I love keeping, they exist because people over 150 years ago thought it was okay, it was reasonable to pay nearly $2,000 for a chicken. Of course, like all bubbles, hen fever couldn't last forever. By 1855, the market was completely oversaturated. Everyone who'd gotten into chicken breeding thinking that get rich had been breeding like mad. Suddenly, there were fancy chickens everywhere. But something interesting happened after the crash. With chickens no longer being these expensive status symbols, they became accessible. Eggs became cheaper. Chicken meat became cheaper. What had been a luxury became food. Pure and simple food. A New York Times editorial from 1854 wrote about exactly this. Cheap eggs, then, is the practical and excellent issue of the poultry fever. Let it rage. While I was researching this story, I couldn't help but see some parallels to today. We've got people experiencing their own little version of a chicken craze. The backyard chicken movement is absolutely booming, and that is wonderful. I love that more people are connecting with where their food comes from. Everyone should have chickens. If you can have chickens, get some chickens. Chickens for everyone. But we're also seeing something similar to post-hen fever in the way we think about chickens. After that Victorian bubble, society went in a direction of industrialization and specialization. We wanted the most efficient egg layers, the fastest growing meat birds. We really wanted to make our chickens the best they could be for what we wanted. We stopped valuing chickens as complete, balanced animals and started treating them as production units. That's how we ended up with the modern industrial system. Broiler chickens that grow so fast they can barely walk. Laying hens that are used up and discarded after just 1 or 2 laying seasons. What's exciting to me about the current backyard chicken movement is that it is, in essence, pushing back against that industrial mindset. People are choosing to have heritage breeds again, not because they're trying to get rich, but because they value the birds as a whole animal. And because they want resilient, healthy chickens that can live normal lives, not production machines. We're rediscovering what those Victorian breeders accidentally created. Beautiful, functional, diverse breeds of chickens that can thrive in small-scale backyard systems. So the next time you're out looking at your chickens, whether they're Barred Rocks or Rhode Island Reds or Buff Orpingtons, you can thank Hen Fever. You can thank Queen Victoria and her fluffy cochins. You can thank all those Victorian speculators who paid ridiculous prices for those fancy birds. Because even though the bubble burst, even though fortunes were lost, what remained was this incredible diversity of breeds that we still benefit from today. It's a reminder that sometimes even human silliness and excesses can accidentally create something valuable. Those Victorian chicken fanciers probably thought they were just chasing easy money. They didn't realize they were building the foundation for backyard chicken keeping as we know it now. And maybe that's the real lesson of hen fever. Good things can come from unexpected places, even from something as absurd as a chicken bubble.